really watch out for your stories, because we all build these stories about ourselves and who we are and who we aren't and what we can do and what we can't do. And those stories are not usually accurate. And if we're not careful, they will limit us.
Hey there, I'm Goli Kalkaran, and this is Lessons from a Quitter, where we believe that it's never too late to start over. No matter how much time or money you've spent getting to where you are, if ultimately you are not happy, then it's time to get out. If you're feeling stuck and you feel like there's gotta be more, there's gotta be a way to feel fulfilled and excited about what you do, then this is the podcast for you. Each week, I will sit down with an inspiring guest who quit their professional career in order to forge their own path and create a life that they love. Hello, welcome back. Thank you for joining us again today. Again, if you want to join our email list, make sure you go to our website at lessonsfromaquitter.com and sign up there. I will be sending out weekly emails that cover all things like mindset, overcoming fears, how to find joy in what you're doing, and other things that can help along your journey. So make sure you sign up for that on the website. I am very excited about our episode today. I got to talk with Steve McCready about how he made the jump from systems engineer in IT to being a therapist. Steve got his bachelor's degree from Brown University in American Civilization. After graduating and not knowing what he wanted to do, Steve focused on his interest in computers and forged a career in IT. He climbed the corporate ladder as a systems engineer, but became frustrated that he wasn't actually helping anyone. After his own personal experience in therapy, Steve realized that his passion truly lied in helping people one-on-one through counseling. He returned to school at the University of San Francisco to get his master's degree in marriage and family therapy. And now, for over 15 years, Steve has been working as a therapist, focusing his practice on helping people who are, quote-unquote, too nice get the clarity, courage, and confidence they need to stand up for themselves and live happy, successful, and fulfilling lives. Today, we get to talk to Steve about how he figured out what he would do next when he wanted to leave his career in IT, how he pushed past those false narratives that he created about himself, and how we can all get better at literally anything that interests us. Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hi, Golly. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
I'm super excited to get into your journey and all the things that you're doing now. But why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about how you got into your original career of IT?
So let's see, when I went to college, I ridiculously started college with the idea that I was, one, going to get 2 degrees because I went to Brown and they had a 5-year dual degree program. And I was going to get a degree in chemistry and creative writing with the idea that I was going to be a writer. And if that didn't work out, I'd be a chemist. One semester in, I realized neither one of those was actually probably going to happen. After basically failing the first chemistry course I took and really struggling in my first couple of English courses. Ended up stumbling through 4 years, staggering out the door with an American Studies degree and going, okay, now what? So that was the glorious start to my professional life. But I did a couple of different things, nothing interesting or notable for a couple of years, but found myself spending more and more time as a hobby standpoint, playing with computers and doing technical kind of stuff, which is something I'd been interested in since high school. And so kind of started teaching myself things there. And so gradually decided I wanted to work my way into an IT career. And the way I did that, it was actually a 2-step process. The first thing I had to do, I was trying to get an IT job where I was working. I was working for Sprint at the time. And this is back when they were just a long distance company. And I was trying to get a help desk job there, and they wouldn't hire me. And it was like, well, you don't have enough actual work experience. I'm like, fine. So I got a part-time job working for a local internet service provider back when there were such things as local internet service providers and dial-up lines. I'm dating myself a bit here, but then that at least got me some actual concrete work experience. And then I was able to leverage that to eventually get a full-time help desk job at another company. And then from there, spent the next several years working in IT. And so it was really a self-taught thing that let me kind of, work my way up the ladder a little bit. And then from there, and then I did help desk for a while, eventually got a job working for a systems integrator as a systems engineer, where I was doing a whole bunch of things, anything from computer repairs to actually designing and installing networks, eventually to being involved on like the sales consulting side. And so really all different pieces,
Right.
because I had both the technical skills and I was able to actually carry on a conversation with a customer that wasn't all tech speak. And so they're like, oh, we can use this guy in sales. And I got pulled into that.
Nice. As for how long overall did you work in IT and sales?
That was probably 5 years or so, I think. Yeah, four or 5 years that I was doing that pretty much primarily.
Was it just like a slow realization that you didn't want to continue in that path, or was it a moment where you're like, oh, I can't do this anymore?
So it was a gradual kind of build-up thing. And what happened is I found at first it was cool and fun. So I was like, okay, cool. I'm getting to play with technology and computers all day and get paid for it, which is like, okay, this seems like a good deal. And was having fun and learning a lot of new stuff. And that was great. And as I did it more, what started to become problematic for me is that it started to feel in a way like it was just it felt like it was technology for technology's sake. It felt like we were selling people stuff because it was like, well, you need to have the newest thing. And it's like, well, why though? And it wasn't necessarily making a difference. So that was one piece. It was very frustrating dealing with a lot of the challenges between the sales side and the technical side, a lot of different difficulties within the technical side, as far as some of the pieces that went beyond the actual technology and the application of it. So there are a lot of little points of frustration in it. And it was this kind of gradual sense of more and more frustrated and irritated, and really often starting to feel like, what's any of this actually doing for anybody? Because it was really hard to see the actual end user customer benefit from some of the stuff we were doing. And so that became more and more frustrating. And then we had the whole thing in 1999 of the whole Y2K, like fear and paranoia. And I spent like half that year, it seemed like, doing these Y2K assessments where we'd go through people's stuff and look and see, are you ready for this? And of course, it was all a much ado about nothing, but it was just this tedious kind of lame thing that I was like, this is not really working for me. And so I felt increasingly frustrated and burned out. And I was like, getting that sense of I can't keep doing this and I need to find something else. But that immediately brought up this other voice in my head that was like, yeah, but you can't do anything else. You can't do anything with an American Studies degree. You can't go back to school. You're too old to go back to school. All this, da, 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 da. So I just started getting caught in this really ugly storm in my head of I hate what I'm doing now, kind of gradually getting to that point. And I don't feel like, and that was a story, of course, I was telling myself, I can't do anything else. I'm stuck. And so that's kind of where I was as we kind of turned the clock into 2000. And that kind of led to a lot of challenges for me, to put it mildly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where a lot of people, I would say the majority of people are, and that's what keeps them stuck is, one, the voice in our head that's the most critical, the most mean, and kind of this bully that keeps you where you are and makes you feel that you can't do anything else, or you're not good enough, or you're not worthy of it, or stop complaining, or whatever it might be, the story that you tell yourself. But beyond that, I think even if you can get past that, people are so crippled by this fear of like, I don't know what else I would do, or I don't have any other skills, or I've been doing this for so long. Why would anybody else give me a shot at doing something else? That we just like keep in the same thing that we're miserable in year after year. So how did you kind of move past that if you didn't know exactly what you wanted to do besides IT?
Well, it was a little messy, but
it always is.
Yeah, right. And so the first thing that happened is, after wrestling with this dilemma for too long and not really taking action around it, I kind of crashed personally. I hit a patch where I really became very depressed and very down, and really just got very kind of stuck in that. And so that led to me seeking out some help for myself, getting into therapy and dealing with a number of different things. There were other things that had been there, kind of neglected. But as I started working on that, I started to see, one, that yes, I could not stay in this work. It really wasn't fitting for me. And two, that, okay, I was getting in my own way. I was telling myself stories that weren't necessarily true, just, about not being able to move, but that it was possibly going to be a little bit challenging. And so as I did that more, I then ended up stepping into a career counseling process. And through that, started to get some more insight into things. Oh, and one other piece that I actually, I'm going to wind back a little bit that I forgot to mention. There was a point before all of this where I'd kind of had the thought of, well, if I was going to do something else, what would I do? And I've always been kind of interested in psychology and personality and those kind of things. And I ended up, I think this was actually back in 99, I took a week of vacation to go to a Myers-Briggs certification program. So I don't know if you know what the Myers-Briggs is, real common personality indicator. And I actually ended up doing a little bit of even consulting around that. This was when I was still in IT, and kind of dabbled my toes in it, and then kind of just didn't do it because I, at the time, knew nothing about marketing, and the idea of like having to market myself was like too scary. And then I just kind of, then things crashed anyway. And so that was kind of lying there in the background. But back to my career counseling, as I'm doing that, a number of things started to come to light. Is one, really getting some clarity about what my strengths are and what my passions are as a person. And then two, and one of the most valuable things of it was going back and looking through my past work and really asking the question of, what were the aspects of your past work that were fulfilling or fun or enjoyable or interesting? Like, what were the parts about it that you liked? And so there were a few things that came to light out of that. One was, I'm good working either, on my own or in small situations versus groups. One, I am good at creative problem solving. And I like a challenge, whether it's technical or people, right? And kind of wrestling with that puzzle is something I find enjoyable from an intellectual standpoint. But then emotionally, the part that stuck out was, in all of my IT work, the part that I had most enjoyed was actually the part that was involved directly helping people to feel more clear, more capable, more confident in their use of technology. So to explain this a little bit more, one of my early IT jobs, I was working in a call center. And this call center was staffed by nurses, most of whom had never used a computer before they took this job. So they were scared to death of these computers. They kind of hated them, right? And so they were always really upset when they'd have a problem. And I found that when I would sit with them for a few minutes, beyond just, oh, okay, it's fixed, do this or don't do that or whatever, when I'd say, okay, so let me just show you a couple things and give them just a teeny little bit of teaching, or here's how this works, or here's this thing, or here's what you can do, that a couple things happened. One, they were very appreciative because they felt more capable of navigating this alien device on their desk. But two, for me, it was like, okay, that felt like I was doing something meaningful. I was helping someone to feel more empowered, more capable, right? And all that. I was like, oh, so it's this little bitty nugget hidden in this history, right? I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So I took those pieces, as well as thinking about just different like spaces where I was comfortable, where I was happy. And one of the things that also had stuck out, and I'd remembered this from the very first time I went to start my own therapy. And I remember sitting in the waiting room outside my therapist's office, and then sitting in the office and just being like, this is such a nice, peaceful space. It's this nice, quiet, peaceful waiting room. And then in the office, it's just the two of us and it's kind of quiet. And so the idea of having a space like that was like, that seems kind of cool. And having my own business is something I'd thought about doing since I was a kid. And so there was all these different little pieces. And so, mixing those together and looking at, from the assessments I'd done, that I listed, careers that were a good fit, therapist was one of them. I'm like, so that was like, well, that's an interesting idea. I was still in that space of wrestling with it. Well, I can't afford to change careers because I might have to take a huge pay cut, and I can't afford to go to grad school. And there was still this little story about I'm too old to go to grad school and all that. So I was still kind of wrestling with it, but at least there was this seed of an idea, right? Of, that did kind of speak to me some.
There's like a really good advice in what you just said, because we try to look at like, what other career could I do? What other job could I do? And you're looking to fit yourself into this, whatever box it is, and you're looking at whatever's already out there. And I kept thinking like, well, I don't want to do X and I don't want to do Y, and with respect to jobs. And I felt really stuck in not figuring out what, my quote unquote passion was. And I hated when people say like, find your passion. I'm like, I don't know what that means, But when I finally sat down and did exactly what you said, and I made a list of just literal things that I like doing. And what do I enjoy about my job and what do I don't? And it's not parts of the actual job, but everyday things. Like, do you like going into an office? Do you like working from home? Do you like talking to people? Do you like being alone? Do you like writing? Do you not like writing? All this stuff. I made this list and it was, ridiculously long. And obviously a lot of it had nothing to do with what I'm doing now or what I would end up doing, but it made so clear to me what I actually enjoy doing. And it made me really sit down and focus on what I don't like. And that opened up so many more opportunities to me, in my vision. I saw so many things that I had never considered. And I think that is really good advice for people that do feel stuck, is that you don't have to necessarily just find what the next career is going to be, because that's a very difficult step to leap to take, to say oh, I don't like this, I'm going to jump into being a counselor. But I think when you start looking at what do I want to do on a day-to-day basis, what do I enjoy doing, then you can see what jobs offer that. So I think a lot of people would benefit from doing something like that.
Yeah, it felt almost like working backwards in a sense, but it just came together from picking up these little bits and pieces along the way and then looking at, okay, what are ways these could go together? And by no means would I say therapist is the only thing that would have worked. It just happened to be one of them, but it was one that had a number of the key pieces. The environment piece, which is important to me. I'm sensitive to my environment. I hated working in a big giant office with lots of cubicles, and the doing work that is meaningful, that feels like I'm actually making a difference, is important to me. I like working on a small scale. I like working one-to-one. I like touching people individually. So this is a better fit for me than being, like a university lecturer where I'm talking to 500 kids, where it's it's not that that's not impactful and important work. It is. It's just that doesn't resonate with me in the same way that working with one person does.
Absolutely. There might be somebody that's interested in, let's say, helping people and how people think and in different aspects of counseling, but they might not enjoy the one-to-one. Kind of have to evaluate that to see even within that field, there's a plethora of things you can do. You just have to figure out what aspects of it you'd actually like. People should really take the time to sit down and really understand what they want to do on a day-to-day basis, because that's what's going to make you happy.
For sure. I would say so.
So you start on this road to realizing that being a therapist is looking more attractive to you. And where do you go from there?
The last kind of piece to the puzzle was this. So I'm at breakfast one morning and I'm there with my then fiance. And so we're kind of doing our usual weekend breakfast thing. And I'm reading the paper and I see this ad in the paper for University of San Francisco for a information session for their MFT, Marriage and Family Therapist, graduate program. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So I'm like, well, I guess I should go take a look, because I'm still I'm dipping my toe in the water and thinking, well, maybe, but I don't know. But, so it's I'm like, fine, but I'll at least go explore this. And so I go to it and I'm listening to them talk. It's like a 1 or 2 hour informational session, I'm listening and this and that and going, okay, this seems pretty cool and interesting. And then I go home and my fiance goes, so how was the thing? And apparently I just babbled on for half an hour nonstop about it, which I don't remember, but she's like, when I finally stopped, she goes, well, you seem pretty interested in it and I think you should do it. All right. And it was one of those things where it was every now and then we need a mirror, right, to reflect stuff to us that we're not seeing. That's often my job and my work with my clients, but we need it elsewhere in our lives. And that was it. I wasn't able to see my own excitement about it. I think probably because part of me would have been really scared by that. Oh no, that means we're going to do this. But having that kind of reflection and that little nudge of, well, maybe you should do this was it. And so then it was well, okay. And then I realized, well, I can always apply and not go, right? And I don't even know if I'll get in. So I was able to kind of keep telling myself these stories all along the way to kind of keep dipping my toe in and then my leg and getting deeper and deeper in the water. So I applied, convinced I wasn't going to get in because my grades from Brown were not good, but they were apparently good enough. And then, so I got accepted and I was like, okay, well, yeah, I guess I'm going to do this thing, and made the decision to go for it, which another related note, I had along the way, as I was exploring this, made a change with my IT job where basically what I did is I quit my job and then they rehired me as a contractor.
Oh, nice.
And it was done so that I would be able to give myself schedule flexibility. And that's what I told them. I said, here's the deal. I'm going to grad school and I'm going to eventually go do something else. And so I'm quitting. But if you would like to rehire me, I'd be more than happy to work for you as a contractor with the understanding that my schedule is going to need to have some things different about it. And they were like, sure, that's fine.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So that helped. Of course, that was one of the ways that I was able to kind of navigate the path of how do you do the transition and how do you navigate the financial piece of it, of course. And so that created flexibility to allow me to pursue the grad school piece of it. And so that got me kind of started on the road.
Just quickly going back to the advertisement that you saw, this interests me so much because, a lot of people subscribe that to like fate or destiny. And, I don't have thoughts on that. And maybe it is, but there's a lot of scientific evidence now. And, they've done studies about selective attention. And there's so much stimuli around us all the time that we ignore the majority of things we're seeing. And we focus on things that are relevant to us. And, anybody that's bought a new car kind of knows, like, you start seeing that car everywhere. And
Yep.
It's a matter of when you have your head down and you're doing your work, you're just ignoring a lot of stuff. And again, like in my personal experience, when I was sort of starting thinking about doing something else and I kept thinking, there's nothing I like, there's nothing I want to do. It's because for so long, I just focused on being a lawyer that I really didn't even know of so many different career opportunities or things that you can do, especially now with the internet and like businesses. And when I started opening up my field of vision, I started seeing so many things that had been around forever and I'd probably seen before, but I had ignored. And I would say like the same thing. I'm sure you've seen millions of ads for different things. And I'm sure you've seen tons of ads for that program, but you just ignored it until like you're at a place where you're open to it. And that's why I really encourage people, even if you're not ready to quit, give yourself the space to start thinking about other things, not just focusing on what you're doing, because it really opens you up to seeing things that were already there that might like trigger something in you or spark an interest that you're like, I didn't even know that this was a possibility.
I totally agree. So I'm not a big subscriber to fate. There's the whole saying of, right, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Right.
And here's the part that's actually, that I would actually kind of correct that. It's like, it's more like when the student is ready, they'll notice the teacher that's been there the whole time, because it's exactly what you're talking about, right? It's this well-known psychological phenomena that when we're thinking about a certain thing, that changes the way that our brain filters input and what we notice and what we don't. And this is a thing that's really important for us to be aware of and understand, because the more we're conscious about what we're thinking about, what we're focusing our awareness on, the more we're going to see things that will support and help us as we go that we might otherwise miss. It's not like it magically manifests them or makes them appear, but it does allow us to notice them, because it's like that's the frequency that our brain is tuned into, so we notice the relevant data. And I think that's a really, really important and powerful thing. And yeah, I'm sure that same ad had probably been there plenty of times. They probably, they do those programs. I think they still do them. It's like a once a month or once a quarter thing. And I'm sure I'd probably seen it before. I just not thought anything of it, or just kind of went right past it, because my brain was like aware of and thinking about this whole grad school and whatever thing. It's like, oh, there it is.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so you get into the school, you figure out a nice transition from your job that allow you to go to school. So were you going to school full time or kind of part time?
So here's how all of that piece kind of worked. USF has this really great working professionals program here, and I'm actually not in San Francisco and wasn't at the time. I'm in Sacramento, but they have a remote campus here, and the program that they do is basically it's 1 day a week. So we had class every Tuesday from like 4:30 until 10 at night, and so this big long block of time, and then the occasional Saturday class. And so it was a 2-year master's program, and so that allowed people with either relatively flexible work schedules or whatever to do that. So I was still working a full 40 hours a week. I just and my Tuesdays I just kind of limited to be just some time in the morning and doing that. And then I would generally do most of my school work. I was generally doing that on the weekends. If I had reading, I'd do that in the evenings or, whatnot. But then I was like my papers and other things I was working on, that was usually kind of in every weekend. I'd be blocking out a few hours to work on papers and such.
I know you mentioned this whole story of I'm too old to go to grad school. And I think a lot of people suffer from that too. And how did you push past that?
I had kind of set that aside initially and said, well, if I am, I guess that's just too bad or something, and kind of, when it applied. But here's the part that totally blew the story up. First day of class, right? that program was done as a cohort group. So there were, I think, like, was it 14 of us who all went through the whole program together. So I walk in on the first day, and half of the people in there are older than me. and a quarter of them are not just older than me, but substantially older than me, like 15, 20 years older than me. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's crazy the things that we stop ourselves from doing by like creating these things. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that just say that mantra of like, I'm too old, and then don't take that next step to go and see like, why are you too old? Like there's all these people doing it.
Some jobs, age actually serves you because it gives you it. Like for me, I mean, I joke about this all the time, but I'm like, the grayer my hair gets, the more people listen to what I have to say because they just assume like, oh, look, he's got all this life experience. But it is true. I had a friend who was in my grad program with me, and she had a real problem at first working with adult clients because she was young for one, and she looked younger.
Right.
She was like 26, and she looked about 22.
Right.
And so when a couple in their late 30s would come to see her, they'd be like, I don't know if you know anything about life, and it would kind of create a credibility issue. Whereas I wasn't old, but I was at 30, 31, 32 in that area, was at least old enough, and I had enough life experience, and I can kind of convey that it gave a certain degree of credibility actually. So it was actually a benefit. Like
right.
when I applied for my first job as a counselor, that was one of the first things they said to me. They were like, no, actually the fact that you're a little bit older is good.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like we create these barriers that are actually like strengths. I mean, it's all out of fear. Like you were saying, taking that little step of saying like, oh, I'll just apply and see what happens. I mean, sometimes we have to like do it in these baby steps because like the fear is just too much and it stops us from doing it. And then you do it and you realize like all of these things were benefits and all of these things were there to help you along. So
right. I mean, it's like, 30 would have been too old to become, say, an Olympic gymnast. But there's plenty of things that wasn't exactly a problem for, right?
Right.
And or even older. Again,
right.
I mean, I've had a couple clients, who have been more in their early 40s contemplating career changes, and at least one case wanted to become a therapist, and they were worried about it. I was like, yeah, no, I don't think you need to worry. And here's why.
I mean, if you're thinking that you're going to work until you're 65, 70, I mean, even if at 40, okay, you have another 30 years of working, 25, 30 years. Why not make a change? I think, but a lot of times we think that thing that we picked when we were 18 or 20, like that's what we have to do for the next 50, 60 years of our lives. And like, that's just it.
Well, right. And the world, I mean, the other thing is the way the world changes and is changing.
Yeah.
Whatever you start doing when you're 18 may not exist by the time you're 30 anyway.
Absolutely.
Or at least it's going to change enough, and it's like, I mean, there's been everything, even a field like therapy, which in a lot of ways is a little, I'll say more behind the times in a lot of things. But even now, it's like people now are finally at the point where we don't think much about doing sessions over the phone or
right.
via video. Or whereas like when I started, that would have been like, well, is that ethical? Is that okay? There's always concerns, or it's just too different, right? Or people who do different lengths of sessions. It was like there's a lot of things that have just kind of changed and evolved gradually, and most fields are changing a lot faster. So whatever you're doing is going to be different. Whether or not you do something different, it's going to change around you.
Absolutely.
I think adaptability is a key thing for anyone in this day and age if we want to be able to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, I mean, what you just said about the whole video stuff too, I think all of these older traditional careers and professions are due for like disruption, and it has to adapt to the way that technology is moving. And so it's right for people to come in and say, I'm going to create a law firm that's different than what law firms have traditionally been, and we're going to do things differently. And there's a lot of like room for that. And so it just takes kind of that courage to do it.
Yeah. And that is part of it. And for me, it was about stepping into things in small steps and kind of building up for there. For some people it is, it's like, you need to know, are you the kind of person who has to like dip your toe in the water and kind of work your way in? Or are you the kind of person who just jumps in? And either approach can work, but you've got to figure out the one that you can ultimately you can do. I always tell people this: at the end of the day, the perfect solution is useless if you won't use it. So a imperfect, kind of clumsy solution that's still workable that you will do is going to win.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I love that. So you get your degree, and you've been now working as a therapist for 15 years?
So I've been working in the field for, over whatever, 16 years now, but I've had my own practice for just about 12. And yeah.
What do you typically focus on with your practice?
Sure. So now I've done a lot of different things along the way, but at this point, I've really dialed in my focus to be pretty narrow. And I do most of my work with people. I characterize them as people who are too nice, by which I mean people who are really thoughtful, nice, caring, empathetic people, but they kind of maybe take it a little too far, end up getting taken advantage of. They end up being overwhelmed because they have difficulty setting boundaries, difficulty saying no, are highly sensitive to others' wants and needs. And one of the things that's an unfortunate byproduct of taking that approach is those folks are prone to connecting with people who can be not necessarily always very nice about making use of them, and not in a good way. So they get taken advantage of a lot. They also just end up overwhelmed by life. Just the act of having a family with a bunch of kids who have wants and needs, and a spouse who has wants and needs, and a job, and they just really struggle with that. So those are really the folks that I most enjoy working with. And that is really what I kind of target my marketing to and target my practice to at this point.
Very cool. And you said that you also do coaching. And so what's the difference between those two?
So the super simplistic way of describing it is therapy is going from bad to good. Coaching is going from good to great. So that's a little bit oversimplified. A lot of the tools I use are very similar, but it really is about where the person is. So if somebody is really at a point where they're having real mental health challenges, depression, anxiety, those sorts of things, then we're going to take it, do it more as counseling, where it's a little bit more structured in how we work and other things. But they get to a certain point, we may have it be where it's coaching, or if someone comes to me and they're like, things are okay, but they're not great. I'd like them to be better, and there's not per se a formal diagnosis. I work with them more in a coaching capacity, because I find with those folks, we can take a little bit of a different approach in how often we meet or how we work. But it really isn't a huge difference. It comes down to it's more about where they are in their journey and managing the situation appropriately to that.
Got it. That makes sense. And you said that you do virtual or like on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be people in Sacramento.
Not at all. Here are a couple other pieces of it. From the standpoint of folks I'm doing therapy with, that's bounded within California geographically, because my therapy license is California specific, and there's still a lot of legality being navigated around that. So for that, but people who I'm doing coaching with, where I'm real confident there's not a mental health concern there, that can be somebody from just about anywhere. And so, so that's the way that works. I even have some clients who are local to Sacramento, but because of their lives or schedules, they prefer to do things via phone because it's easier. And also some of my local clients now, we do our sessions, we go out and walk. So we don't stay in the office, we go out and walk, because some people find that the movement kind of helps them to be able to kind of get into their head more, and we're able to do better work. And that's cool. Helps me get a little extra exercise.
Yeah. Well, and how do you find most of your clients if it's not just local?
Right. Well, so these days I have kind of two primary mechanisms that my clients come to me by. One is referral. I've been doing this long enough, made enough connections that either other professionals that I know who specialize in different things, or past clients will send people my way, which is great. And then my other primary source is really via my online presence. I set up my first website back in 2007, when it was still being debated whether it was ethical for therapists to have websites, because they were concerned about it being inappropriate advertising. And it's come a long way since then. Pretty much every therapist is online, but I do, so between that and, blogging and other things, I also use pay-per-click advertising via AdWords, which was a tool that I used, especially in 2007. That really is how I initially built my practice, because again, I was able to leverage my technical skills, my data analysis skills, and apply them towards something that really directly helped build my business.
Oh, that's great. So you've given a lot of advice throughout it. So if you have any additional advice or resources or book that you think somebody that's sort of where you were, when you were stuck in your IT gig and you were, Like, what could you say to them?
Okay, let's see. So
And it's like a super easy question.
it's a great question. It's so open ended. There's so many different places that I could go. So a couple things. I mean, someone who's wrestling with this and feeling stuck, one of the things I would actually suggest they do is I have actually a movie I would suggest that they go see. Go see because it's not in theaters. It's an old movie. But yeah, I would recommend that they watch Dead Poets Society.
Oh yeah, great film.
And it's one of my very, very favorite movies. And if anybody wonders like about, well, why do I do this? That movie will point it out real specifically, because there's so many elements in that movie there that really illustrate, I think, the challenges so many people have with having something inside of them that they either don't have the support to let out or are afraid to let out, and really needing somebody to help them get that out into the world, right? And so for me, that's a big piece of what I'm trying to do. And that movie has been so inspiring to me at different points in my life and in my journey. Yeah. And so I think it's a thing that would maybe kind of charge people up in a really good way. And so that would be a movie recommendation. And then I think another thing that I would really tell people is to really watch out for your stories, because we all build these stories about ourselves and who we are and who we aren't and what we can do and what we can't do. And those stories are not usually accurate. And if we're not careful, they will limit us in really, really awful, restrictive ways. And they will keep us from being who we are really capable of being. And so I think learning to do that is one of the most important things ever for anyone, really. I had to do that, obviously, as we talked about, around becoming a therapist. And I can give you actually another example of where I've kind of faced down that part of myself and really discovered and embraced a whole new piece of who I am that's really been a great addition to my life.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool. So there's a number of people in my family who are super artistic. And I have an aunt who was a really great painter and taught painting classes. My mom is an amazing artist. I have a cousin who is very creative, another aunt who is. And so it's this thing that's kind of always in the family. And I was, as a kid, I liked kind of drawing and playing with that, but I wasn't very good at it, or at least I didn't think I was. And I got frustrated real easy, and I kind of gave up, and I didn't have anybody per se helping me with it. And I just didn't know what to do. Because I wasn't good at it immediately. And so I just kind of decided, I'm like, I guess I'm just not artistic. And so for years it was like, oh, I didn't get the creative gene in the family. And then one of the things that happened for me when I was kind of going through my own personal crisis and doing my own therapy is I came across, not for the first time, but again, I came across the work of Jackson Pollock. And as anyone who's kind of studied him and all knows, he had some real serious mental health challenges. We believe he was bipolar and a real troubled guy. But I remember seeing a couple of his paintings and thinking, oh, that's what's going on in his head, because it resonated with me in a way it never had when I was younger. And I was like, oh. And so that kind of inspired me a little bit. And so I started kind of playing around with it again. And I found this real kind of therapeutic value in just the creative expression and giving myself permission to just do it. Because I was also at that point working on my perfectionism tendencies. And so it was this really great exercise in, I'm just going to play. I'm going to not worry about being perfect or good or anything. And it proved to be, one, very therapeutic, and two, turned out that like, oh, I'm actually able to do this a little bit. And so I played with it on and off for a number of years. And then more recently, when my current partner, she actually is an artist and was very into art. And so I had kind of neglected it for a while, but I started playing with it again and got a little bit more serious about, not that I'm going to try and per se make a living out of this, but I'm just going to do this and I'm going to stick with it. And I'm going to give myself permission to be bad at it, to work on it as I'm just going to work on getting better at this and keep practicing it. And what I found was a couple things. One, it is, again, for me, it's one of the most important pieces of self-care that I do. But then as I kept doing it, I started sharing it with people. One day I posted, I have my Instagram account is primarily, it's actually primarily about my artwork, but I post this painting of mine and a friend of mine messages me. He's like, how much? I'm like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? He's like, I want to buy the painting you posted. I'm like, oh, So then I'm like, my girlfriend, I'm like, what should I charge for this? And so I came up with a number and sent it to him. He's like, okay. I'm like, what just happened? And so it was one of those things where it's like, okay,
yeah,
I guess maybe I'm artistic after all.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yes.
But it really proved the whole thing of this. It doesn't matter where you are. If you believe that you can work and grow and improve and give yourself permission to just try stuff and experiment and iterate, you can get better at anything.
Yeah.
At anything. And again, I have no interest in making a full living as an artist. If I can pay for my art supplies, that would be pretty cool. But the point is, I can create things that visually that I enjoy creating, that give me something, and that some people, that they appreciate, that they like, that it's able to bring a little bit of beauty to their house. And through sharing that story, I've managed to kind of nudge a couple other people to play with it, right? And to try it themselves or to take something up, which is great, because that's what I want to do, is to help everyone let go of these restrictive stories they have about who they are, because we're all capable of some pretty awesome stuff. But mostly we have to get out of our own way to do it.
I could not agree more. I mean, I think that's a great way to end this. I think all of us have told ourselves like stories from when we're kids, and we end up just gravitating to what we're good at and not doing stuff that we thought we're bad at. And I've found the same thing. I'm rediscovering things that I really do love and I'm not very good at, but it doesn't matter. Like, it's giving me a joy that I never let myself feel because I just wouldn't let myself do it. And it's so important to just play around with things and go back and really evaluate what you've told yourself and really figure out where that came from and why you told yourself that and push back against it. So I think that's the best advice for everybody. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Where can people find you or reach out to you?
From the standpoint of my therapy and coaching work, my website is just my name. So that's Steve McCready, and that's MCCREADY.com. So they can find me there or just email me, steve@stevemccready.com. So that's where they can get me there. I do have a website as well as an Instagram for my art. And for that, if somebody was interested in seeing more about that, they can search for or go to my website is limbicvisions.com. And that's LIMBIC visions.com. And for those who are wondering, what the heck does that mean? Well, the limbic system is the part of the brain that processes feelings. In my work, I do abstract art, and that's the idea. This is more kind of intended as an expression of feelings or things in my head or things of that nature. And so that's kind of where the name comes from for those who are curious.
And I'll put all of that information in the show notes. So if anybody can't write it down right now, you can go back to the website and find this episode, and all of that will be there. Thank you so much, Steve, for being here. I really appreciate it. I loved all of the advice you gave, and I feel like it'll be super helpful for a lot of people listening.
Well, you're very, very welcome. I'm more than glad to be able to kind of share my stories if they are of help or use to somebody else and kind of nudging them along their journey. That's great, because that's what I'm here to do. So hopefully I've been able to do that.
You have. Thank you. Have a great day.
Hey, you too.
Thank you so much for listening. I can't tell you how much it means to me. If you liked the podcast, please rate and review us on iTunes. It'll help other people find the show. If you want to connect or reach out, follow along on Instagram and Facebook at Lessons from a Quitter, and on Twitter at Quitter Podcast. I would love to hear from you guys, and I'll see you on the next episode.